At 10:17 on a Tuesday morning, my husband's black credit card stopped working in the middle of the bank lobby. He had just tried to charge a $38,000 wire transfer for a luxury car. The cashier pushed the card back across the marble counter and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Vale. This account has been closed." My husband, Daniel, turned white. Then his phone rang. It was the bank manager calling to confirm that every card connected to his name, including the $850,000 business credit line, had been frozen. He looked at me as if I had set the building on fire. I placed a blue folder on the counter. Inside were our mortgage deed, the company guarantee, and one signed document Daniel had never bothered to read. I said, "You locked my credit card. I only returned the favor." 2 hours later, Daniel would lose access to the company he believed belonged to him. 3 weeks later, his family would be begging outside my office. And 6 months later, the house he had threatened to throw me out of would be sold at auction to me. This is how it all began. My name is Mara Ellison. I was 38 years old, and for 11 years I had been the quiet engine behind Ellison Cold Storage, a refrigerated logistics company outside Port Mason. Daniel was the face of the business. He wore tailored suits and told people he had built the company from nothing. I handled the contracts, payroll, permits, insurance, and warehouse expansion. On the night everything changed, we were at my father's 70th birthday dinner. 20 relatives sat around a walnut table while Arthur cut the cake. Daniel sat beside my younger sister Tessa, the company's new brand director. When dessert arrived, Daniel tapped a spoon against his glass. "I have an announcement," he said. "Starting next month, Tessa and I will be taking over operations." The room went silent. I looked at him. "Taking over from whom?" Daniel smiled. "From you, Mara. You've been useful, but you're no longer necessary." Tessa leaned across the table and said, "Everyone knows you only got those accounts because Dad introduced you. You're not a businesswoman. You're an anxious bookkeeper with a filing cabinet." My father stared at his cake. My mother folded her napkin into smaller and smaller squares. Not one person defended me. Daniel reached into his jacket and placed a red envelope beside my plate. "Inside is a separation agreement," he said. "Sign it by Friday, take $20,000, and leave the house. The company stays with me. If you refuse, I'll prove you mismanaged the accounts." I opened the envelope. It claimed I owned 0 shares. Even though I held 62% of the company, Daniel lowered his voice. "And don't try using the company card anymore. I already locked every card with your name on it." I placed the agreement back inside the envelope. Arthur finally looked at me. "Mara, be practical. Daniel is offering you a clean exit." I wiped a speck of frosting from the table with my thumb. Then I said, "All right." Daniel laughed, Tessa laughed, and my father exhaled as if I had finally become reasonable. They did not notice that I had taken the red envelope with me. They did not know what was inside my blue folder. I had never been an employee of Ellison Cold Storage. I was the majority owner. When Daniel started the company, his credit score was 611, his savings were $7,400, and 3 banks had rejected him. I had inherited $420,000 from my grandmother and supplied the first capital. The warehouse deed and equipment leases carried my signature. I personally guaranteed $850,000 of the bank loan. Daniel received 38% of the shares for handling sales and managing drivers. But the most important document was the 1-page operating agreement in the blue folder. It said that any transfer of company assets, any new debt above $50,000, or any change in executive control required my written approval. Daniel had been trying to sell the company to Tessa's fiancé, Victor, for $2.3 million. He had already moved $184, $600 from the operating account into a consulting firm registered to Tessa. The bank sent every statement to my private email, and cameras covered the accounting office. The consulting firm had no employees, no office, and only a mailbox at a shipping store. For 4 months, I collected evidence: invoices, wire confirmations, photographs of locked drawers, and security footage saved to 3 drives. Daniel thought locking my card would make me powerless. In reality, his decision gave me the final proof that he was acting against the company's interests. At 82 the next morning, I sent one email to the bank, one to the company attorney, and one to the insurance carrier. The subject line read, "Immediate suspension of unauthorized financial access." I attached the operating agreement, the wire records, and a photograph of Daniel's separation agreement. Then I waited. At 10:17, Daniel's card failed in the bank lobby. At 10:19, the manager confirmed the $850,000 credit line was frozen. At 10:21, online banking disappeared from Daniel's phone. At 10:24, the bank asked whether I wanted to cancel guarantees on new borrowing. I said, "Cancel every authorization signed after yesterday." The manager nodded. "And the corporate cards?" I looked at Daniel, who was gripping the marble counter so hard that his knuckles had turned gray. I said, "Remove everyone except me." That was my one calm response. I took one precise action. I revoked the guarantees, terminated Daniel's executive access, and instructed the bank to require my signature for every payment over $5,000. Daniel's phone began vibrating before we even left the lobby. He answered the first call. "What do you mean the fuel account is blocked?" The second call was from a leasing company. The third was from Victor. By the time we reached the parking garage, Daniel had received 14 messages. He turned toward me. "What did you do?" I held up the blue folder. "Nothing you didn't authorize," I said. Then I drove away. The first consequence arrived that afternoon. The fuel supplier suspended us because Daniel had used a company card for $9,800 in personal travel and a $38,000 vehicle deposit. 26 trucks stayed parked. The second consequence was the calls. Daniel made 46 calls over the next 3 weeks. He called me from his office, his car, Tessa's apartment, and 2 different numbers I did not recognize. I answered exactly once. He said, "You're destroying your own marriage." I replied, "You destroyed the part that was honest." Then I hung up. The third consequence arrived when the bank reviewed the $184, $600 transfer to Tessa's firm, and demanded repayment within 10 days. Our attorney also found 2 vendor contracts signed with my name. One signature was so careless that he had written my middle initial incorrectly. The fourth consequence was total collapse. Victor abandoned Tessa when he learned the company could not be purchased without my approval. The venue kept her $18,000 deposit, and tax investigators opened a case. Daniel tried to blame me publicly. He posted online, "My wife stole a family business and left 30 workers without jobs, but the workers knew who had kept the trucks running." I arranged a temporary fuel facility, negotiated a 6-month repayment schedule, and promoted our operations manager, Lena Ortiz, to acting chief executive. Within 5 days, deliveries resumed. Within 3 weeks, every employee had received their paycheck. Daniel's version of the story lasted 4 days. The documents lasted forever. On the 4th Monday, Daniel arrived at my new office with Tessa, my father, and a lawyer who had never reviewed the operating agreement. My office was on the 2nd floor of the largest warehouse. Behind my desk was a framed copy of the original deed. On the table sat 4 objects: the red separation envelope, a silver flash drive, a bank statement, and a ring of warehouse keys. My receptionist called me. "There are 4 people here demanding to see you." I said, "Send them in." Daniel entered first. He looked 10 years older. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his right hand trembled around a folder. Tessa pointed at me. "You embarrassed us in front of the whole family." I touched the flash drive with one finger. "No," I said. "The invoices did that." My father stepped forward. "You are still married. You owe Daniel loyalty." I opened the bank statement and turned it toward him. "Loyalty is not a blank check." The lawyer cleared his throat. "My clients believe you unlawfully removed Mr. Vale from the company." I slid the operating agreement across the table. Clause 9 requires my approval for a transfer of control. Clause 12 forbids personal expenses above $2,000. Clause 14 allows suspension for fraud or unauthorized debt. Daniel stared at the pages. You recorded me? I pressed the button on the silver drive. The office speakers played his voice from the accounting room. Move the money through Tessa's company, the recording said. Mara will never look closely. She trusts paperwork because she doesn't understand people. Tessa covered her mouth. My father sat down, Daniel whispered. That was taken out of context. I stopped the recording. The context is on page 47, I said. Your signature is underneath it. Then I placed the warehouse keys into a small envelope and pushed it across the table. You have until 5 o'clock to remove your personal belongings from the old executive office. After that, the locks change. Daniel looked at me with the same confidence he had worn at my father's dinner. You'll regret this, he said. I answered, I regret waiting 11 years. No one moved. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the ticking wall clock. The family believed the confrontation was the end. It was not. 2 days later, the tax investigator found a second fraud scheme. Daniel had created 12 fake maintenance invoices over 18 months, totaling $96,400. The money had paid for hotel rooms, jewelry, and a private apartment he kept for someone named Elise. Elise was not a stranger. She was Victor's older sister, and the person Daniel had promised would become the company's financial director after the sale. When Elise learned that the sale was dead, she turned over every message Daniel had sent her. One message read, "Once Mara is out, the company is ours." That careless sentence changed the case from a marital dispute into a coordinated attempt to seize a business through deception. The final twist came from security cameras. Before my father's dinner, Daniel entered the accounting office with a duplicate key, photographed the deed, and tried to replace it with a forged transfer document. The camera captured his face, his watch, and the exact time, 1:14 a.m. He had not merely planned to remove me. He had planned to erase me. The court ordered Daniel to repay $281,000. His accounts were frozen, his car repossessed, and Tessa's apartment sold to cover the debt. My father stopped speaking to them after discovering Daniel had also borrowed $40,000 in his name. 6 months later, the bank auctioned the property Daniel had tried to use as leverage against me. It was the house where he had told me to pack my bags. I bought it for $612, 45 cents on the dollar. Using money from the company's recovered accounts, I did not move back into it. I converted the house into a training center for small business owners who needed help with contracts, credit, and financial control. At the front entrance, I placed a brass plaque that read, "Your name belongs on every document that protects your life." Ellison Cold Storage grew by 31% the following year. Lena became permanent chief executive. I became chairwoman and bought out Daniel's shares through the court settlement. He ended with no company, no house, no fiancé, and no family willing to answer his calls. The last time I saw him was outside the courthouse. He stood beside a cardboard box containing the contents of his old office. He said, "Mara, please." We were married. I looked at the box, then at him. "We were," I said. "That is why I gave you 11 years. Then I walked past him without turning around. Leaving was the hardest decision I had ever made. Fighting was harder, but protecting the work I had built was not cruelty, and refusing to be exploited was not revenge. Sometimes the quiet person in the room is not powerless. Sometimes they are simply the only person who kept the receipts. Never sign away your name, your money, or your future just to keep a family member comfortable. And if someone locks you out of your own life, check the documents before you panic. What time is it where you are, and where are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels.